On today's episode of Behind the Wire, I have three stories. One has to do with our initiatives. Second one has to do with protecting these Somali daycare centers. And the third story is Washington took a loss in federal court yesterday. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Behind the Wire on Rebel Radio. I'm your host, Robert Burwell, and I'm also the president of the Washington 3%. Today we're going to be talking about three stories, as mentioned in the opening. And the first story, state Democratic leaders say they won't consider Let's Go Washington initiatives. So one option the legislature has when we file initiatives is they can look at the initiatives and decide on whether or not they want to vote to just go ahead and pass them anyways. Rather than wait for it to go to a vote of the people, they might look at them and say, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll pass that. And in particular, the two Let's Go Washington initiatives that they're not going to be looking at this year are one that was recently passed, and that's the Parents' Bill of Rights. That was passed by the legislature in Washington State, about a year and a half ago, I think 2 sessions ago. They passed that one. And the reason they passed it was election year. And they knew it was going to pass, and they wanted to win the goodwill of the voters. So they just went ahead and passed that one because they knew it had a really strong support. And that bill has to do with us parents having the right to know what's going on with our kids in public schools. That one, they passed it. Everybody was shocked, but they were happy. Yay, parents, we get it right. We get to know what's going on with our own kids in school. Well, then once the election was over, last year, they revisited that and said, oh, you know what? We need to change this because it doesn't align with some of our existing policies. So they basically gutted it and, basically made it so we no longer can have any information of what's going on with our kids in school, which is right back to where it was, hiding stuff from us. The school's hiding stuff from us about our own children. I did a video about this last spring when they did it. So if you want to go back and look at that, you can look that up. But basically, they feel that they are the parents of our children, not us, that they know better for our children than we do. And so they gutted that bill. The only reason they passed it in the first place was just to win votes that year because they knew they were in trouble. So, but as soon as they got reelected, they gutted it, right? So the first one of these initiatives that is going to be on the ballot this year is, again, to restore the Parents' Bill of Rights as originally written and as originally passed by the legislature in the state. They're not going to even look at it. They're not going to pretend to pass it this time. They're just going to let it go to a vote in November. The second one is schools, not schools. That was the first one. The second one is barring transgender students from playing in girls' sports. Okay. This one's pretty straightforward. This is an 80-20 issue. 80% of the people in the United States think, boys have no right in girls' sports. Title IX says girls are allowed to have their own sports so that they can have fair competition. And but the lunatic left in this nation, in our state in particular, they feel that just because a boy puts a dress on that he should be able to compete against girls. And the biggest problem with this is anything that's really a physical type sport, boys are going to perform better as a whole over girls. Yeah, there are some girls that can beat boys in certain things, but as a whole, boys are stronger and faster, and it's an unfair advantage for them. And how this hurts girls, because these people say, well, so what? So the girl doesn't win. She still gets to compete and all this stuff. Yeah, she still gets to compete. But the problem with this is a lot of these girls do sports so they can win scholarships to go to college and things like that. And then you throw a boy in there who just dominates. He gets the girls' scholarship. And the girl who would have won the scholarship, she don't get it. It's unfair to girls. It's totally unfair to girls. It violates Title IX. And bottom line, it violates anything, it violates fairness in any way you look at it. It's not fair for boys to compete against girls and take opportunities away from them in their own sports. But anyways, that's the second one. So our state legislatures have decided they're not even going to look at them because they don't support them. That's why they're not going to look at them. They're just going to say, no, we'll let it go to a vote. And so the House Speaker, Laura Jenkins, says she doesn't expect the House will discuss either the bills. And she says, I don't think we'll be taking action in the House on it, Jenkins said. And I think voters will have a chance to decide, and I don't know if I'm authorized ethically to give predictions on outcome of that. Senate Majority Leader Jamie Pedersen added that the Senate won't hear them either. So neither house is even going to look at them. She says Senate Democrats are 100% aligned with the Speaker, with what the Speaker said, Pedersen said. I am certain we will not be passing either of those initiatives. I think it's unlikely that we'll hear them out because they never believed in them. Okay, this right here tells you they never believed in the Parents' Bill of Rights. They only passed it for political gain in an election year, and then they gutted it the very next year. They don't care about either one of these. They don't care that girls are being robbed of opportunities in their own sports that they're by law supposed to have. And they don't care that parents want to have a say in what's going on with their kids at school. They feel that the government knows best and that parents don't need to know because the government knows better for what's better for your children than you do as a parent. And that's complete total garbage, but that's the way they think. So this is a midterm election this year. And midterms generally don't have a very good voter turnout. So we really need a very strong turnout on the conservative side come November to make sure these two bills pass, to keep boys out of girls' sports and to take your rights as a parent back away from the state to know what's going on with your child in school. So next November, make sure you turn out in droves and that you vote. That's all I got on that subject. Our second subject we're talking about is how the state is trying to protect Somali daycares in Washington State. Now, we do know, we all know what's going on with Minnesota right now, right? The fraudulent Somali daycares, fleecing taxpayers out of hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, just came out yesterday, this year alone, $750 million left Minnesota in bags carried by people in carry-on luggage. $750 million moved through the Minnesota airport headed for Somalia. Okay? All from these fraudulent daycares. And we also know that because of the massive fraud in the state and the fact that a lot of government workers, many of them, probably most of them Democrats, a lot of government workers in Minnesota reported the fraud. And the leaders in the government intentionally did nothing about it. The governor didn't do nothing about it. The attorney general didn't do nothing about it. It's already cost their hapless idiot governor, Tim Walz, his career. He is no longer going to seek re-election, and they're actually calling for him to step down as governor of the state because of the scandal. So there is a high political cost for the revelation of all the fraud that's happened in Minnesota. Several other states are under the microscope. have Illinois, you have California, of course, and Washington's also under the microscope. And there have been a lot of allegations of fraud in Washington State, and independent journalists were going to these places to, knock on the door and ask them if they'd be willing to talk to them. And of course, they didn't. You know, I mean, if you're not committing fraud, you'd say, yeah, go ahead, come in. We got kids here. Look, you're an operating daycare, right? They wouldn't allow them in. The only reason you wouldn't allow them in is because you're doing something you're not supposed to. But anyways, in order to cover their own ass, our government in our state is making a couple of moves to try to protect these daycare centers and, in effect, protect themselves from a backlash of any fraud that's discovered, because the state has not been doing their due diligence. They have not been auditing these places and verifying that the money is being spent on what's supposed to be spent on. I mean, we've already seen it. I did a story on that like a month and a half ago, of a bunch of NGOs in Seattle that were ripping the state off with child programs, to help, troubled youth and stuff, that tons of millions and millions of dollars that are completely unaccounted for. The state didn't do any audits, which are supposed to be done yearly. They didn't do any audits for over 10 years. And we have all this money that just poof was gone, right? So we know the state doesn't do their job. So the state is trying to protect themselves by doing a couple things. The first thing they're doing is Washington State's Attorney General, Nick Brown, recently announced his office would investigate hate crimes against home-based daycare providers, which are often Somali, who face door-knocking and fraud accusations aiming to stop harassment, while federal agencies are actively investigating widespread fraud in similar Minnesota Somali daycares, creating a complex situation of state anti-harassment efforts versus federal anti-fraud investigation in Somali communities. So, Washington State's Attorney General Nick Brown, he's upset that independent journalists are going to these places and knocking on the door and asking, hey, you want to talk to us about this? We'd just like to know if this is really a functioning daycare, and would you like to step outside and talk to us? And of course they refuse. And now, according to our Attorney General, that is now a hate crime. Investigative journalism is now a hate crime. Now, this has been going on forever. Journalists have always, when there's accusations of fraud at a business, they go to that business to find out. They knock on the door and they want to talk to somebody. Never in the entire last century, that was never harassment. Now, all of a sudden, because these Somali daycare centers are being investigated, and we know our state isn't doing their due diligence and making sure our tax money is not wasted, they're moving to protect these people by saying it's a hate crime to go to these businesses. It's a hate crime for us to want to know if our taxpayer dollars are being spent legitimately or being used in fraud, like what happened in Minnesota. It's our money as taxpayers. We have a right to know. Journalists have a right to go to these places and verify that they're actually using our tax dollars for what they said they were going to use them for. It's our money. It's not Nick Brown's money. It's our money. We have a right to know if it's being spent like it's supposed to be spent. But now it's a hate crime. He wants to make it a hate crime to ask if they're spending their money like they said they would. That's now a hate crime. Right? Yeah. Oh, evil us want to know if they're using our money like they're supposed to, if they're sending it to another country. Yeah, that's a hate crime. It's complete bullshit. It's a cover your ass move by Washington State. And that's only the first part. The second part of this just happened, I believe, yesterday. I'm not sure. Yeah, when was this filed? No, this was January 5th. Okay. So, on January 5th, Washington Democrats are advancing a bill critics note would make it harder for public to scrutinize daycare providers at the exact moment serious fraud concerns are coming into focus nationwide. Senate Bill 5926, sponsored by State Senator Lisa Wellman, who is a Democrat out of Mercer Island. Nothing corrupt there. expands public records exemptions for child care providers, shielding a wide range of personal information from disclosure. The bill extends privacy protections beyond in-home daycare operators to all licensed or certified child care providers in Washington, including large centers that receive substantial taxpayer funding. So, awful big coincidence that now that all these investigations are happening, now that all of a sudden they want to pass a law that is extending privacy protections to these large daycare centers that are receiving public funding. It's public funding. We are the public. We have a right to know if they're using the money the way they're supposed to or not. Like I was just saying about the whole hate crime thing. Not only are they making a hate crime, but they're also making it a protected information so that we can't find out if they are actually enrolling students or not. And it's our money. We have a right to know if our money is being used like it's supposed to be used, like they said it was going to be used when they accepted. If they're accepting taxpayer funds, those records need to be public for us to verify they're using our funds the way they said. It's our money. It's not yours, Democrats. It's the people's money. And we have a right to know if they're enrolling students or not. And by the way, it's your job to go in there and look at those records and make sure they're using their money like our money like they're supposed to. But you haven't been doing that. So now you're trying to cover your ass and shut the public out of one more thing that we should be able to have knowledge of. I mean, they've already shut us out of so many things, things that used to be public record, we now can't look at, and it's always to cover their butt for something they're doing that's illegal, and how they're wasting money. They cut us out of a lot of the budget hearings and stuff now. It's our money. It's not yours, Democrats. Okay, and this is another reason why you need to vote these idiots out. But, beating a dead horse at this point. But anyways, they like to keep saying, oh, we're transparent. We want to increase transparency. And then they keep passing stuff like this that locks us out of the process and does away with any transparency of any kind in this state. And why all of a sudden are they doing this? Why are they hiding the records all of a sudden? Why are they making a hate crime all of a sudden? Because they know there's fraud. And it's not so much to protect these places that are committing the fraud. It's more to protect their own butts and their own political future, because they know the fraud's going on and they haven't done nothing about it. And it's going to cost them when it comes out. That's why they're making a hate crime. That's why they want to hide the records, to cover their own butts, to hold on their own political power. That's what it's all about. Our third subject, and this one's an actual good news subject for once in this state. Washington took a major loss in federal court. So, let's see here. Okay, here we go. So Washington just lost in federal court, and the ruling is a clear win for federal authority. A federal judge has ordered the state to turn over all documents tied to migrants receiving Medicare, Medicaid, or Washington Apple Health. Now you remember, right? A while back, the federal government asked Washington to provide all their Medicaid records to make sure that they weren't illegally putting non-citizens on a government-funded health care, because by law, they are not allowed to receive health care or welfare or anything like that. If you're not an American citizen, you're not entitled to receive health care and all these other things. But we're a sanctuary state, so we've been giving it to them illegally, in violation of federal law. And if federal funds pay for it, the state cannot give it to illegals because it's against federal law. So anyway, so what happened is the records have to be handed over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. No loopholes, no sanctuary carve-outs, no bureaucratic games. For years, states like Washington have acted like they could shield information from the federal government while still taking federal money. A judge just said, not anymore. If you're receiving taxpayer-funded benefits, the federal government has the right to verify eligibility, and ICE has the authority to enforce the law. Again, Washington has been using federal money for Medicaid and giving it to people who are not eligible to receive it, which is people who are here in the United States illegally are not eligible to receive federal funding for Medicaid or food stamps or any of that kind of thing. But, and the judge just said, if you're receiving taxpayer-funded benefits, the federal government has the right to verify if you're eligible, and ICE has the authority to enforce the law. So, Washington, after all the blustering a while back about, oh, we're going to fight them in court, well, you just lost. Okay? We had an actual federal judge up here, no less, that actually sided with the federal government for once. And the reason why this judge sided with the federal government because it's blatantly, it's just so blatant that if you're using federal money, you as a state have to show the federal government those records. Okay? It's called Federal Supremacy Clause, for one thing, in the Constitution. Federal law is above any little state laws they want to pass, their little sanctuary laws and policies. They do not take precedence over federal law. Federal law takes precedence over anything the state tries to do. And I told you a few weeks ago when they said that they were going to fight this in court, I said they were going to lose, and they lost. Now, one thing that's kind of striking about this is, normally when the state takes a loss like this, they immediately, announce they're going to be appealing it. I haven't heard a peep. Not yet. They still might appeal it. But the fact that they're not, rattling their sabers and saying they're going to immediately appeal this tells you a little something that they know they don't have a leg to stand on, because they don't have a leg to stand on. They don't. Federal law trumps state law. Period. You cannot hide records of what you do with federal funding from the federal government. You can't. And Washington's going to be in trouble when they look at those records. And the federal government is probably going to demand that money back. And I'm sure that, I think Trump already cut off the funding last night. But yeah, he's, going to cut off funding to sanctuary states. And of course, that'll go to court and all that. But yeah, if they've been misusing federal funding, there could be, federal charges. They could have to pay money back. All kinds of things could happen. So this is a start. But all that blustering they did about how they were going to fight the evil Trump administration, and they weren't going to hand over our records. Yeah, you just lost. Because states cannot tell the government no. The federal government no. But that's Washington wasting our tax money fighting in court when they know they don't have a leg to stand on. Anyways, so at least that's a little bit good news for once. We don't get that very often here. But hopefully the federal government will turn a much stronger eye towards all the corruption and stupidity that's going on in Washington State and start doing something about it. So it looks like this loss yesterday was just the tip of the iceberg, and I hope the government keeps coming after them, because there's a lot of shady crap going on in this state. But that's what you get when you have Democrat majority. So, gripping tip of the day. Let's talk about making fires. Now, we've talked about, preserving food and all this kind of stuff, but you got all this food, right? We talk about, how you need to boil water, right? You got to boil water. You need to cook this food that you've got preserved or reconstituted, whatever. You need to be able to make fire, right? And all these people, a lot of people think, well, I got a couple lighters. I got a few boxes of matches. I can make fires, yada, yada. That's only going to last so long, especially in the long-term event. If the power's out for like forever, never going to come back because of EMP, something like that. Some long-term event, you have to actually know how to make a fire. Also, if by chance you're just on a day hike in the woods and you get lost out there and you don't have fire making stuff with you, you're screwed in the Pacific Northwest because it gets wet and cold. It doesn't get super cold like it does in other parts of the world, but because of the wetness that we have here, the rain, the fog, it gets a chill that goes right through you. You get hypothermia real quick in the woods out here, right? You have to be able to know how to make a fire. There's a lot of different ways to make a fire. So one thing, number one, if you're ever hiking in the woods, you need to have at least 3 ways to make a fire because it's really damp. It's hard to make a fire out here, especially in the wintertime. So you have to have several ways to make a fire. Now, again, in a long-term situation, power outage situation, lighters run out, you use up all your matches. How are you going to make a fire? There's lots of different ways. One way is, fire still, right? Get your little ferro rod, make a spark, light a fire, right? One thing that aids in making a fire using the ferro rod is you look at all of our trees in Washington. You see this green hanging moss, this moss that hangs down, kind of stringy hanging moss in all these trees. That's old man's beard. You pick a bunch of that, leave it in the house for a day or so. That stuff's nice and dry. One of the best fire starters out there. Old man's beard. It's out there just to grab. So with a little spark, you can start a fire with old man's beard. Really, really easy. That's one good way to make a fire. Now you can also use steel wool. Again, using your ferro rod, strike steel wool. Steel wool burns. That's a good way to. That's another good way to start a fire. Aside from the ferro rod, you can go on YouTube. There's lots of different ways to start a fire if you don't have a ferro rod. One of the ways, if you ever have watched TV, you got the board, you got a guy with a stick, spin the stick till it gets hot. That does work. I do it all the time. That's something that you need to practice and need to learn how to do, so that if you're out someplace, you can grab a stick, you can make yourself a board of some kind. It doesn't have to be a real board. You can take a splinter of wood or something and use it like a board. It's pretty easy to do once you figure it out. Lots of videos on it. I'm not going to go into depth on it, but doing this with the stick or using a bow drill with the stick, you can start a fire. It is possible. Another way is using a friction roll. Now this is something, again, you can go on YouTube and look this up. And it was something I seen on a guy's fire making channel. And I was just like, what? I was blown away. So I actually tried it, and first try I made a fire. No spark, no matches, no lighter. I made a fire. Basically, you take charcoal like from a fire, right? Leftover coals from a fire. You take that dust, you put it in like some tissue paper, paper towel, whatever. Twist it up like a joint or something, I guess, right? You twist it up like that. You put it on a board, like a 2x4. Take another 2x4, lay it on top of it. You just rub it back and forth, and you just keep spinning that thing, putting pressure on it, and that will heat up, and it'll start to smolder. It'll be red, and you can then drop it in like old man's beard or whatever, and you can actually make a fire. And like I said, I did it on the first stinking try after watching the video, and I was just amazed. And it's not just charcoal. There's a lot of other ways you can start a fire with friction rolls. A lot of other materials you can start a fire with friction rolls, and it'll shock you what they are. But if you go on YouTube, then I really suggest you do, because it's a pretty interesting rabbit hole to crawl down. But there's a lot of ways to make a fire that doesn't require matches or a lighter. And those are some skills you need to hone. Because, again, in a survival situation, you have all this food, you have a creek nearby. If you can't make a fire to boil water or to heat up food or reconstitute food, you're not going to survive. So learning how to make a fire and learning many ways to make a fire is very, very, very important skill to have, especially here in Washington, where fires are really hard to make because it's so damp all the time. And with that, that's my prepping tip for the day. Like I said, be sure to go check out some videos on that, because you'll be amazed at some of the ways you can do this. With that, that's all I have for tonight. Once again, I'd just like to remind you, if you want to learn more about us, who we are, what we do, go to our website, www.wa3%.org. And while you're there, you can check out our bylaws, see who we are, what we believe in, and what our rules are as far as how we expect our members to conduct themselves and all those type of things. Also, while you're there, you can visit our charity, which is Boots on the Home Ground, which is bothg.org. You can go there and look at our charity. It's for veterans and for communities in Washington in need. That's all I got to say for this episode, and I'll see you next time on Behind the Wire. Good night.
Alright guys, this is a new segment. This is your Washington 3% Intel officer, and we're going to start bringing you Intel reports on the things that we see going around, because these morons are pretty active on social media. And so we'll bring the things that we're aware of, most of them, to you guys, so you're aware when you're out and about what you might run into. First thing coming up, January 15th, King County Airport. No King County deportations, hosted by La Resistencia at 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. January 16th, Olympia, Harrison and Division. ICE out for good. Rally, march, maybe. They want Kristi Noem impeached, UK. January 16th, Seattle, the Henry M. Jackson Federal Building, a protest. Trump hands off Venezuela. Free President Maduro. What a great idea. These idiots don't care about Venezuelans. Regardless of the reason Trump's down there, this is good for Venezuelans. That guy is at peace. January 17th, March and Rally, Palestine Resists. This is going to be at the Denny Park, 2 p.m. January 17th, Yelm Rising, Free America Rally across from City Hall, I believe, at the City Park. January 17th, World Beyond War, Global Day of Action. More Palestinian groups. Resist imperialism. March on Saturday, starting at Heritage Park. This is in Olympia, 12 p.m. Sunday, January 18th, Teamsters apparently supports socialists and communists. So if you want to go help build some banners in Tacoma, there's the address. On January 20th, this is a national day of action, the Free America Walkout. This could be interesting. This is put on by that 501 group that's put on a couple big rallies. They say 1 year into Trump's second regime, we face an escalating fascist threat, ICE raids on our communities, troops occupying our cities, families torn apart, attacks on our trains, siblings, mass surveillance, and terror used to keep us silent. It is time for our communities to escalate as well. On January 20th at 2 p.m. local time, we will walk out of work, school, and commerce. Wait a minute. They work? Okay. We will withhold our labor, our participation, and our consent. A free America begins the moment we refuse to cooperate. This is not a request. This is a rupture. This is a protest and promise. In the face of fascism, we will be ungovernable. We will walk away from fascism. We will walk towards a free America. We fight for a future that belongs to all of us. Everybody in, nobody out. Welcome to the Free America Walkout. Anyway, you can see on the calendar, these are all the locations. I'm not going to go into all of them, but if you go to their website, you can find all these locations so you're aware not to be anywhere in the vicinity of these morons on January 20th. Because you can bet there'll be traffic problems and whatever else. January 24th, Fireman's Park, again in Tacoma. 1 year of resisting Trump rally in March. That's at 1 p.m. And I've got a bunch of screenshots of Evergreen Resistance and all their banner and sign waving and intersection locations and dates and times. You can slow it down and pause so you can take a look at that. You need to know exactly where that is. This last couple things, just want you to be aware that they are very active politically, and we need to be too. And as you can see, they're wanting to protect vaccine access. They have posts about the gun bills. They have posts about the trans girls, boys, whatever, in each other's sports, and contacting their politicians and going on the website and voting pro or con and all that. And we need to be doing that too. We need to make sure that this garbage doesn't pass. The last thing I wanted you to see, this was on one of their Instagram accounts. Nonviolent does not mean passive, preventing ICE from doing their job. De-arrest your community members. De-arrest your community members. In other words, they're telling people to fight ICE agents and basically unarrest people who have been arrested. Keep filming and get in their way. This is how people get shot. You can thank politicians for pushing this garbage on these soft-brained people who then get in their cars and go out and get in the middle of all these law enforcement operations. Just so you're aware, this is what they plan to do. This is what they are doing. Anyway, be safe out there. Thanks for listening again to Rebel Radio. We'll see you next time.